tonight and respond to each other's perspectives as well. So I'm certain this is going to be another fascinating discussion as these two incredible patriots, these heavyweights, as I call them, weigh in and, basically give us their take on the landscape of what's going on right now. So there's certainly a lot to talk about. So Carrie, welcome back to the show. Great to see you again.
Oh, thanks. Great to be here.
Absolutely. And Gene, it's wonderful to talk to you again, my friend. How have you been?
I've been doing well. Thank you, Patriot.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate both of you guys taking the time tonight. So let's just dive right in. There are a lot of different things that I'm curious to pick your brain about. And as always, I have a laundry list of questions, but wherever the conversation goes is fine by me. If you two want to, interact to each other's responses, I think that's what's going to make this really interesting. Feel free to do that. So let's just kick it off. So I was reading a post from Q the Storm Writer recently that it highlighted so many different aspects of this war, not only from a historical perspective, but also how certain events took place post World War II that evolved really into this multi-theater epic battle, both on the surface and beneath the surface, as we know. And I wanted to lead off with a question about this topic, and I'm just going to sort of provide a little background here because I think it's going to enable us to go in a variety of different directions. Now, in this post, Stormwriter talks about how, I believe it was in 1939, that by that point, several Nazis had made contacts with individuals in DC. They were touring the East Coast of the United States covertly. And he talked about how the FBI became aware of their presence and they sent an agent to investigate this whole thing. And apparently one of the individuals was being followed by this agent. I can't remember his name, but he followed him. This was in Boston, from South Station to somewhere around the Charles River, right around Harvard University. And allegedly he went into a house and he seemed to disappear without a trace. And then later the FBI discovered he had escaped into a tunnel that ran from underneath Harvard University all the way to New London, Connecticut at a naval submarine base. And so apparently the Nazis were very well acquainted with these tunnel systems back in the World War II era, which I understand still exists to this day, and that they're guarded by armed personnel. And of course, this ties into so many different issues. Like I said, it ties into Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, because apparently Epstein had private offices in Boston directly above these tunnels, and Ghislaine Maxwell had a submarine license, and reportedly she could operate submarines. Now, reportedly, there's these secret military tribunals being conducted in the Virgin Islands right now. I've heard reports that Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, basically has been flipped, and he's providing a whole bunch of intel regarding this submarine child trafficking network. And apparently this is connected to New York's Five Finger Lakes, as well as several other areas as well. So, and by the way, Hunter Biden has a tattoo on his back of the Five Finger Lakes, or he did anyway. So I'm just curious, Gene, I wanted to, ask you about this, to comment, because it really it ties in so well with your expertise, not only based upon what's going on in these tunnels, but obviously, I mean, you spent many years on a submarine, so I think you have a unique perspective as well. So have you heard about this, Nazi connection to Harvard and the use of the waterways as a means of child trafficking? I'm sure you have, but what can you tell us on that subject?
Yeah, so first of all, it looks like Carrie is frozen.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't see that.
What? No, I'm having trouble because Zoom only wants to show me because you guys both have just pictures. So I've had to play around with it. It should look okay to people now on the Facebook, if that's what you're getting, Facebook messages. So just, bear with us because this is just how Zoom is acting. It's just, really annoying, but nonetheless.
Okay, Gene, take it away.
Okay, yes. So most people realize the Rockefellers are nothing but illegitimate offspring of the Rothschild, which are originally named Bauer. That are, of course, the upper part of the lower part of the cabal. of the Khazarians or the Ashkenazi or the Aristonazi originally came to Earth. They are long into building tunnels all over the world. The East Coast has a series of connected tunnels. Some go to the submarine base at Groton, Connecticut. I was stationed there on a fast attack, although I was hardly ever there. I was mostly in the Med and the Northern Atlantic during that time doing special ops. So the sub base there and all of those undergrounds actually go, there's submarine tunnels, of course, that go across the entire continent, not just to the Finger Lakes or just to the Great Lakes. They also go across the entire continent of the United States. And part of the big domes they built starting in the 40s, after we had nuclear material, available weapons to help create the domes rapidly. The idea was to power them, and I believe David Wilcox has put this out before, to power them, David Wilcox, sorry, has to power them using nuclear submarines. So most people do not understand how much power a nuclear submarine has. On one of my shore duties in Hawaii, the power grid for Oahu, where Pearl Harbor is, went offline. They tripped the entire island offline, and the only way they could get it to go back online is have an external power source to jumpstart it, kind of like you do when you have a dead battery in your car. So what the Navy did is they contacted the New York City, which is a nuclear-powered fast attack submarine. It's the Los Angeles class. And they reverse shore power, added extra shore power lines first. Reverse shore power brought their reactor online to 80%. They didn't even go full underway, 100% power. They went 80% and powered the entire island of Oahu. I mean, you're talking Honolulu, massive amount of a huge power grid. And then they jump-started, powered, had enough power to go to that station, that main power station, and jump-start it. So they contacted the submarine. Okay, we're going to jump-start now. Watch your gauges, all that kind of stuff. When you get a sudden draw, and watch the power lines, they don't overheat, etc. And they jump-started the entire thing. So the original idea of the domes was to do the same kind of deal, is to hook up the submarines to power the domes. When their original idea was to nuke the entire Earth, create seed banks beforehand, create the domes, go into the domes, nuke the entire Earth after they had the submarines pull into these domes and power them. And a nuclear reactor lasts for decades. The core of the reactor has to be changed very rarely, lasts for decades. So that would have now enabled them to have that power. So now what is happening in Ukraine is that not only the Hitler and his group pre-World War II, World War II, et cetera, but even before that, Stalin had built a massive tunnel system in Ukraine, plus the Arsenal. When they first came down in Bakhmut area and in the Ponic Steppes in the Carpathian Mountains in Ukraine, they created tunnel systems. So Ukraine is, I shared this on a situation update I did, is a massive tunnel system that is centralized and hubs out from Bakhmut. That's why you do not yet see the Wagner group. And again, I want to remind people that the Wagner group is the main people fighting. The Russian military, the SMO, only fought at the beginning, and now they've been on this, just building up all these trenches, 3 layers deep of fortifications and trenches and pillboxes and massive, for this supposed spring offensive, or if they have a spring offensive, it's kind of like a summer, like last year, their spring offensive happened in the fall. At this time, I don't know if they have to the fall. If they delay it to the fall, they may be fallen before the fall comes. So the reason they have not enclosed in a cauldron a pincher move, they have the military there, the Wagner group, to close in Bakhmut and Avdiivka. Those Bakhmut's the main hub, and Avdiivka's the backup. You always have a backup, like submarines. There's a hull valve and a backup valve on your sea systems. This piping systems that connect to the ocean. So you always have a backup. And that hubs out to Kiev and Lviv and all over the entire Ukraine and out into Europe. It goes up to under Lake Geneva to the Dome at CERN. All of this is all interconnected to Ukraine. That's why they're fighting so hard. They kept saying Ukraine's not pivotal. It's not pivotal. It's not important. Now they've stated, Zelensky himself has stated that it's absolutely pivotal. It's not just optics. It is pivotal. And that is a fact. If they lose Bakhmut, all those tunnel systems are now able to be infiltrated by the Wagner group, and they can go in and start with forces coming up, because that area in the Carpathians, the second area they landed in, that actually goes all the way down to the center of the earth, to the cultures inside the center of earth, like the Agarthans and other cultures that I've mentioned previously. And they will come up and help from the inside to help clean this mess up. And those also hook to all of the 30 plus bio facilities, as a certain person in the US has called them. They're not weapons labs, they're bio research facilities. Okay, whatever you want to call them, we'll play semantics. So bio research facilities, they were going to, the week after Putin went in, they were going to launch a bioweapons attack on Russia. And so that's why Putin went in. He had no more time to wait. He actually had started going in the week before that. They've announced he actually started on the 17th, not the 24th of February last year. But that was to prevent this weapons attack that had been patterned for Slavic people. They had genetically made the weapon so that it would target the Slavic people of Russia. So the combined neocon satanic West globalists want to remove and divide up Russia's massive resources into 6 or 10 different areas. They'll administer the resources, as they always say, for the peoples there, like you did for Africa and Iraq. And let's take the recent one in Syria, like that, like Shell Oil goes in and you even call it the Shell operation. It's like, okay, yeah, that's for the people, all right. The oil goes straight to the West and they get nothing at all. And then I love the interview or the presentation by the Russian ambassador or the Chinese ambassador for life to the UN, where he was asking the presenter about U.S. military presence on the ground there. And he said, there is no U.S. military. There's not U.S. bases and military in that country. No. Then how come the U.S. media is saying that there were U.S. military injured in a terrorist attack there if they're not there? How did they get injured there if they're not there? So, this is all of the sleight of hand we see going on. And now Lavrov has made an incredible speech, because they're now Russia's the head of the Security Council, chairing the Security Council. And you can imagine how it's a rotating thing, how peeved the globalists are, because Lavrov made a huge presentation just talking about the pipeline and the truth about the pipeline and the truth about Ukraine, the truth, all of this is being flushed out. And now with the removal of Tucker Carlson, everything from this point on, we need to look at it as getting ready for the election. They have stated, and right after that, happened, of course, we have in that exact same time frame, Biden announcing he's going to run, where this guy's so bad, he has to be let off by the stage by the elbow. This guy's going to be your guy running. And 70% of the people, in a recent poll said they don't want him, of the U.S. people. The U.S. population doesn't want him to run again. So
yeah, most Democrats don't even want him to run.
Yeah. So there's kind of my intake there. I'll let our input. I'll let Carrie speak, or you go ahead.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, so, we kind of went in some different directions there, but that's fine. Carrie, you can certainly feel free to comment on anything that Gene said in his breakdown there. But, I guess where we started in a sense was, talking about the tunnels and the child trafficking networks and their Nazi roots, really going back to the end of the World War II, not even really the end of World War II, but, during that era, and I was specifically referring to, the East Coast and the submarine aspect of this, which I think is just incredible that they did this on such an industrial scale and had literal submarines involved in these trafficking networks. I know it probably shouldn't blow my mind at this point, but when I read more and I learn more about this, it really does. It's just truly incredible, the vast scope of this depravity. So that was going to be in essence my question, if you wanted to talk about that a little bit, just in the sense of what you're hearing about the progress they're making with the tunnels, or anything, the historic connections to the Nazis, or certainly anything that Gene talked about as well. We can also shift the discussion over to Russia, if that's the way you want to go, but I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys. And very interesting information, Gene, and actually Patriot as well. So I have to say that I have a few nuances that I'd like to add there in different areas that you talked about. So one of the things is talking about the Carpathian Mountains. And actually, this is where you get into Romania, Transylvanian Sunrise and Moonrise, and the Radu Cinnabar books, of which there, last time I looked, there was 5, but there's probably more by now, because Peter Moon is an American and he translates from the Romanian into English. Sometimes they delay them. The State Department or the intelligence community doesn't really want Americans to know what's really going on, so they delay these books, which are actually primary in understanding what is inner Earth and the inner Earth civilizations that are actually starting to interact with us via our secret space program and the Romanian secret space program, for some reason coming, underground through those tunnels. And last I heard, there was some rustlings that they may actually want to come, even dialogue out in the open and on the surface. Now, I don't know where that's gone since then. That was a year or 2 ago. So, but I want to say that these tunnels that you're talking about that, go to Iraq, and they go, they actually go to the Great Pyramid, that area. It goes like all over the place. This is actually a tunnel system that does encompass Romania. So it's important, and probably some of the other Eastern, especially the Eastern Bloc countries, where they were able to get away with a lot of the tunnel boring and so on and so forth. And so I just want people to understand that this is not limited to Romania. Not that you're saying it is, but it definitely. And then we have to also look at Taiwan as being another kind of outlet, if you will, for a lot of this stuff. Now, I have to say that there's something going on as far as I'm concerned. You're talking about Russian subs or subs of any kind, and my understanding is that even this is many years ago, but they were talking about like small nukes, the size of I think suitcases, more or less, that could power underground bases, and that's what they were using. So they weren't using submarines per se. And there was a woman, I don't have her information in front of me right now. She was considered to be an archon, in essence, and a specific woman who was kind of high up in the echelon, who created a company back in those days to manufacture these mini nukes that would then power all of these underground places. So I would think that is much further along, and that submarines, maybe when they have submarine channels, actually, because these things do go very deep, might take part in some of that. I know there's special subs being created by the Australians right now for the US, and they've been working on this for a while. There's news out there that actually tries to reverse that and says that the US is giving the Australian submarine stuff, but maybe they're giving them help with the technology. But the bottom line is that the actual construction, according to my whistleblower, of these small submarines, they're small, is actually happening in Australia, and they're actually mass producing these now because China has a huge fleet of submarines, and this is how some of this war, I guess, is going to be fought, or this ongoing war that we're seeing. So what seems to be the case, which happens to, humans all the time is that everything we see on the surface is something of a dog and pony show distracting you while you don't look under the surface. Okay. So anything we see in the news and we see and, again, on the surface is probably the opposite even. And I'm sure Gene can speak to this. And, I think it's important to talk about because I think people get misled. They get a clue, they get somebody coming forward and telling them something, something. And then bottom line, it's actually a misdirect because the real information is going, deeper and the real war is happening deeper. Okay. So as we go into this with the white hats, let's assume that we're, part of that group. Then you have to look at the situation that they're dealing with is that they started at the surface and they had to go down and it goes down deeper and deeper and deeper. The earth is honeycombed. That's the term that one of my whistleblowers uses. So the earth is honeycombed with these caverns and these bases and even, whole cities, as you may know. And they also have their own source of lighting and even a sort of a mini sun type thing going on. A lot of this is just described in these Radu Sinamar books. So I highly recommend them. I do talk about them from time to time. I've read all 5, and there's a lot more to it than that. Then you have to bring in AI, and we can definitely go down that road today some more.
Oh yeah, I got some questions on AI for later. No worries.
So, but I want to make sure to kind of bring this discussion around to this idea that things that are happening on the surface, and we can even talk about Tucker like that. Okay, yes, I think that some positioning is happening with regard to, I think it was Steve Bannon put out an article stating that, saying that he thinks they're positioning to get Tucker out of the limelight during the time when we're going into the 2024 election so that there is a distraction away from Trump and his power, which is, by the way, I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like it's growing daily, actually. And Biden is just weakening daily. So, these people are, anyone who's following Biden at this time can only be considered to be brain dead and completely mind controlled. Okay. There just cannot be another explanation for that. Okay. That's just a given. Now, I think Robert Kennedy and him getting into the race, I think he's working with the White Hats. I think he's doing a service to distract and to pull votes away from Biden, corral them under him for a period of time until at the last minute he's going to back out. And I think in essence, the choice is going to be, he will probably even what do you call it when they augment or they give they turn something over to another candidate, whatever that terminology is. So I think that these are the kind of moves we have to watch. I think there's a very interesting side gambit going on the part of
abdicate, I think is what you meant.
Advocate, maybe. But anyway, okay. So, but there's a side issue going on with regard to what's his name? Now I'm getting a blank. Okay. They do this
Tucker?
stuff to me. Talking about Florida, the Florida governor that's gone on over to Japan.
Oh, DeSantis.
Yeah, DeSantis. So DeSantis, basically, I just want to say that the evidence has been, put out there. It is out there if you want to search it, that he basically was working for the Queen. Okay, she's no longer alive. I don't know what his relationship with the crown is at the moment, but it's an easy thing to understand how they have shifted and taken on board some of the Trumpisms, if you will, and shifted them over to DeSantis. So people think he's a viable alternative when in reality, especially if you listen to Juan O'Savin and who's been tracking DeSantis's actual moves, okay, in favor of the people and so forth. And you find out that he actually didn't do things that he could have done to out the steal of the election and so on and so forth. So somehow he's being controlled. I don't know if he's going to continue to be a player. I don't know if some other wild card's going to come forward or not, but it's worth watching the deception. And I think Tucker's whole transition right now is really fascinating. I think we could talk about that if you guys want to go down that road, because I have a lot to say on that.
Absolutely.
And I don't
Absolutely, we can do that.
distract too much, but it is the media landscape and what is really going on there. And I think it's quite fascinating. Repositioning and all kinds of stuff.
Okay, well, let me, I actually had a question that was partially about Tucker, but also it involved the Fox News and Dominion settlement and BlackRock and everything else. So let me just kind of pitch this out there. And, Gene, you can comment on that. And certainly, like I say, anything that Kerry brought up that you want to revisit, feel free to do that. But, we got into Tucker Carlson a little bit there. And I wanted to get both of your perspectives. Obviously, Kerry, you gave us a little bit of yours on his exit from Fox just days after the network had reached a settlement with Dominion. But obviously, this has raised a whole multitude of different questions. Some people have suggested that, what Kerry just laid out for us, I'm not going to restate that. Other people have said that, there's a possibility that, he could be running for president even. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that to me seems a little bit far-fetched, but I mean, he's made some statements that have sort of indicated that he might do that, or he's open to that. But one really interesting question here, I think, revolves around, what's really going on at Fox News, because none of us obviously can forget the role they played in stealing the 2020 election. They were the first ones to call it. And by the way, Trump recently pointed that out and said that it was an act of treason in all caps. I don't think we can discount that for a second. And I think we can all probably agree, everyone out there in the audience included, that Tucker and Jesse Waters were really the only voices on that network that offered, in my view anyway, any real insight into the truth. And by the way, Fox, I believe, shed $930 million in market value when the news about Tucker broke. So it didn't take long. So, I mean, Gene, what's your take on Tucker, his departure, why it happened? And, sort of what's going on behind the scenes there? Do you think that maybe BlackRock is involved? A lot of people have said because they increased their position, I understand, pretty significantly in Fox News about a week before the settlement. So there's lots of different questions here.
Yeah. So with Tucker, I feel, again, it's of course about trying to control the election narrative, and in other words, the optics. I totally agree with everything that Kerry said, that they're trying to get in front of the narrative. The alliance is using Kennedy to pull election votes away from Biden, and so that then they can destroy what remaining groundswell he has or are following. And then, of course, the arrest or the indictment, or however you want to look at that, is all optics. That's probably going to heavily weigh in Trump's favor. It's going to cause the Hunter laptop to come out as they go into discovery of evidence, because there's a lot of material on the laptop involving that indictment, which is totally, just pathetic. And then Tucker, of course, would be talking about all these things. And so it would add fuel to Trump. It would, all the narrative with DeSantis, of course, working for the Crown Corporation. Kerry's right about that. Whether the Queen's off-world being in a tribunal or what, I don't have privy to. That's my last, but that's old. I don't know where that lies. But Tucker is definitely, if he goes, he is able to get his contract, that if it says they paid him, continue to pay him till 2025, and they just bench him, but he can't continue to say anything. But if he can get his lawyer to say they're trying to go from the direction that if they're not using him, then he can get out of that contract. It's a massive contract. I mean, it's 20 million a year. He's getting like 1.8 million or something like that a month. To me, that's mind-boggling. I can't even conceive of doing that. But
yeah, most of us can't.
Yeah. And so, you know, people are, of course, the mainstream media saying he's in seclusion, and people are seeing him with his wife running around Florida in a golf cart and all kinds of fun stuff. He's having a good time. You know, from everything I've been able to gather, he's turned a corner in his life. He wants to be truthful and honest and get the real news out there on mainstream. He was the only real news. His following is so vast that if he goes to social media, if he were to go to Rumble or to Brighteon or to whatever, that platform would explode. He would take millions with him, and millions more would come just to see what he has to say, because of the news is so massive already with what's going around, with this tucking into the election timeframe for the president, and all of this coming together is likely to cause a big possibility. It's already in Congress talking about, you said the laptop didn't exist. You said the stuff about the jab and the pandemic and all this was what you said. That's not true. You're saying the stuff about Ukraine. How are we supposed to believe anything? You had these 50 signed professional tech people that said that the laptop's not real, and we find that was totally fake. That was a total farce. If you want to talk about election tampering, that's precisely what that is. It was exactly at that time. So this is going to bring out a lot of groundswell and see what is going to be fascinating to watch how the Tucker thing turns out. And then I wanted to go back to where Carrie started with Romania and the Bucegi Mountain Complex and the Cinnabar books, 5 books. There's some still in Romanian. The BFS team, we have a person that speaks Romanian and is translating those, and we're going to be doing Decode on deep dives for the Bucegi Mountain Complex that ties to the Giza, the viewing room, and all of that. And it actually, there's a Sphinx there, and all of that ties to the Giza Plateau and the pyramids in the Giza Plateau and the Sphinx in the plateau that was there first. They always put the Sphinx first. The Sphinx is far, far older, by tens of thousands, likely hundreds of thousands of years older than the pyramids. But the pyramids, most people, when they think of Egypt and the pyramids, they only think of the main huge pyramids you always see that are laid out on the belt of Orion. But in actuality, the Nile has originally flowed past the base of the pyramid, and there were literally docks there where they can unload and materials and upload materials from the pyramid down into the tunnel system all over the Giza Plateau. It went all the way out into the middle of Africa and then down into South Africa, into that huge dome they've created there. And then the Nightmare Alley they've created under Libya. That's completely, as Carrie said, the world is a honeycomb besides hollow. And the inner earth, as in the Smoky Sun book, there is a sun in the inner earth. I did that and explained the physics of it in the Hollow Earth Decode I did on deep dives, but it's also on my Rumble. And that series of connections to Romania is very pivotal, and it's very ancient, and it's very high technology. And so this goes back to technology even beyond and before Hyperborea, but it's primarily Hyperborean. And that connects directly to Crimea and the pyramids that Carrie mentioned that are buried and ancient in Crimea. These are 3 sacred sites that are interconnected that create a trinity of energy to scale the energy for free energy, mind-to-mind contact around the entire Earth. The Finger Lakes were actually part of that. The pyramids that used to be in Rochester, in Chicago, in the Mound Builders Belt, they weren't mounds, they were pyramids like Teotihuacan. That connected to this system. For each continent, you had a area. So you look at Asia, Africa, and Eurasia, and Europe. That creates a trinity or a triangle of energy, and that connects to the other side, which is the American continents. So you had ones in South America, in Mexico area, going all the way up to the Great Lakes, around the Great Lakes, and then a huge pyramid up in Alaska. And the huge domes that connect from that all the way down through all of that, and then have under ocean lines that go to the huge complexes in Bucegi, Giza Plateau, and Crimea. So you have, every time a trinity of connections, and these connections go worldwide to create an energy grid, both above ground and underground. So the Chegi is incredibly important and connects directly to the Giza system. And then the little miniature suitcase, yeah, Trump has actually talked about that they now have these miniature suitcases. They're very tiny. They're not even the size of what they call the football. The original idea was, and of course they always maintained it as a backup of the submarines, but now with the technology so far advanced, these little suitcases are way more powerful than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So you could literally power an entire base or city with just a little suitcase, because the nuclears that they're using now are interdimensional capable. So it's creating an interdimensional or a cross dimension, cross timeline, like what caused Chernobyl, caused Fukushima, was a bleed of nuclear materials from another several timelines into this one, where they're dumping nuclear waste into reactors, and you have formulas that you're calculating for nuclear waste, and you're dealing with that, but you're getting more from another Earth. Now what you're calculating to compensate is not going to be compensated. Your reactor is going to go absolutely hypercritical and have a meltdown. So that's all tied to this. It's all interconnected. So the Australia building the mini subs to compensate for, China is said to, by the year 2030, to outstrip the combined West with its submarine fleet, which is primarily, in nuclear speaking, their newest class is the Swede class. These are NATO designations, which they say they only have 2 in commission. There's actually 5. These are very similar to the Beret Soviet class that have impeller drive systems where they can shut the propellers down, like you see in Red October, which was completely factual. That submarine defecting, going to the US, that was pretty darn close to 100% truth. And those Beret class now are so silent and so stealthy, it's very, very hard to track them. And the Swede class, SUI, is pretty much the same thing. And then the class before that they're still having commission, the primary one they're running is the Shang class. That's like the Soviet era Victor IIIs. And then the Han class is their oldest one. That's equivalent, to show you where they're at, of the LA class submarine. So they have very high-end submarine technology and a lot of nuclear submarines, plus their conventional submarines, of which they have 4. They have some old Soviet Kilo class, which are incredibly quiet. A conventional submarine, when you shut down the engines and you go on the battery, they're incredibly quiet. They can also have the advantage, the first submarine I was on was a diesel submarine, conventional submarine, of being able to sit on the bottom. So we would go sit on the bottom of the Bay of Tonkin and launch SEALs from hangars and mini subs and all of that kind of stuff to go into Vietnam. You can't do that with most nuclear submarines because it fouls the coolant systems intake for the seawater that cools the fresh water that cools the reactor. So it would foul your systems up. They also have the Song class, the Wang class, and the Ming class. They have a fairly large conventional submarine fleet as well, which is, the US moved away from that. I thought it was stupid at the time, and I still think it's a stupid idea to pull away from using conventional submarines. It's not wise to get rid of powerful cards in your hand when you're looking at a worldwide scenario. So as we look at the shipyards for China's massive submarine fleet, it's interesting to note that the main shipyard is in Wuhan. Interesting how everything goes to Wuhan.
Wow, that's interesting.
Stands up the Yangtze River, where their docks and all of that are. And so it's just interesting to see how everything ties together. So I'll let Carrie and you talk some more.
Thank you, Gene. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Carrie, we going back to the issue we had started with. I mean, I love that we can have a conversation. It goes in so many different directions, but as Gene points out, I mean, everything really connects at one level or another. So you want to touch upon, did you have anything else you wanted to add about the situation with Fox and, Dominion and Tucker?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, I do, because I think it's important. First of all, what I did some of this I did put on my Telegram already. And just to mention to people that I do go on Telegram, I write commentaries on the news, on the whatever's breaking news. And I often have commentaries directed at White Hats and about the White Hats in conjunction to what else is happening, right? Because, we're involved in a war. There are two major sides of this war, and you've got, the good side and the negative side. And it's important to kind of keep the focus happening so that you understand, or the audience understands, that we are involved in a war, and that it's not lessening up. Okay. It's heating up. And so what I wanted to say was, I see there can't be a coincidence between Lemon leaving CNN at the exact same, 24 hours that Tucker is leaving, okay, Fox. And so the way I look at it is, and it's kind of funny to look at the situation from a longer view, okay, from the idea that when you have somebody who is like a talk show host or whatever, or a news broadcaster, they're never leaving anywhere without some place to land normally. All right. So there's a preparation period. And I put out, after this announcement came out, I put out this lecture that Tucker had given to the Heritage Foundation 3 days before he left Fox, or at least the announcement came out. So 3 days before the Friday, as far as I know, that was his last show, as everyone knows. So what he was saying, and that was a very powerful speech. I sent it around. It started making the rounds as well. Somehow I stumbled on it. I don't even remember how. And then there's another speech in which he's talking a lot about, basically Big Pharma. And that was made on the air on Fox maybe even several weeks before he left. And I don't remember the exact date of that speech, but you can look it up. So what I'm saying here is that there is a sense, in my view, that Tucker knew exactly what was about to happen to him. And I would say that Lemon also would have known, okay? Because, you have to know this business. In fact, there's a television series. It's called something like Morning Something on Apple TV, that's about how news people, kind of prepare to leave, and how the rumors happen, and how the whole thing unfolds when they decide to change, the changing of the guards, so to speak. So Tucker knew, okay, there's no doubt. In fact, if you listen to him closely, you can actually hear that, that he's kind of starting to go down a road, and he's talking more and more about things like honesty. And he's talking more and more about things like, the whole pantomime that was the COVID situation, and how he wouldn't have taken it no matter what, and this and that. So coming out in a way that no news broadcasters in the mainstream have the guts to do. So clearly positioning himself, you could even say asking for them to try to fire him. Okay. So why would that be going on? And then I was posting this idea. A lot of people thought or heard rumblings that the White Hats were thinking of buying CNN. And in fact, that may be still in the works. So the idea that Lemon leaves and Tucker leaves means they're both in play. And if White Hats were to get hold of CNN, they could actually utilize both these guys. Now, I know that normally Lemon doesn't have politics that follow along with the White Hats, but the transition that you can see that Tucker went through, because I don't know, a year or two later, ago, he used to say he despised Trump, and suddenly he's defending him and going down the road about exposing, I'm sure the White Hats had some role in making sure that he got the January 6th footage, for example, and other things that he started to realize there were just fault-based lies that were happening in our government and coming out of the Biden administration, and so on and so forth. So this is a moving target, but it's also building, and I think it's building to something. I would actually assume that if the White Hats are really worth their stuff, that they would buy a major network at this point. I think in terms of Fox, they might have wanted to give a hostile takeover over there, but I don't think that they could get past the Rupert Murdoch family. So, this is what we're really seeing is a throwing down of the gauntlet, even on the part of the deep state, basically, challenging the white hats mano a mano. So this war that's happening is getting more in your face, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that the white hats are feeling the heat. And I also want to say that Crimea, when Jean mentioned that, Crimea is a focal point. It's always a focal point as far as I'm concerned. And so is Kazakhstan, I think it is. So it's one of the stands, but it's the major stand where they have the super futuristic technology, and they have a future city and so on and so forth. That place is also bound by land. It's all completely enclosed by land, that country, Kazakhstan. So what happens is they have been planning for eons and eons for any kind of earth changes that should or would come along to insulate themselves. And Kazakhstan is one of their primary places. I also want to, I know I'm kind of going a lot of different directions here, but there is a lot of directions to be had here. And I think that when people, only focus on like one thing at a time, right? That's actually playing into the hands of the Illuminati. I think people need to be thinking about these things on many levels simultaneously. Yes, it's called 5D chess. There's a reason for that. Okay. But people, I don't think people should be sold short. I think there are plenty of smart people out there that are getting all kinds of information. In fact, we're getting a lot of intuitive information about what's really happening in our world and around us. And I also I want to put a footnote on this television series, Power, that is about teenage girls getting electricity in their hands and going out and changing the world, because they're changing the power structure of a group that has been oppressed through the eons in the patriarchy. Okay. So this is a whole different ballgame, and it gets into the X-Men scenario that I've been talking about, and it gets into the people, the human hybrids, alien human hybrids that have been led across the border in, the southern border of the United States. But it also gets into the establishment of these what appear to be reptoids and reptoid bases in Africa that are made up of a lot of these off-planet races that have destroyed their own world and have come here and been given land in Africa and underground bases and such. So we are having, the white hats want to veer away from any focus on the alien question, but the trouble is the alien question isn't waiting around for them, okay? And it's not going to wait around for anyone else. And neither is this X-Men scenario that we're entering into this incredible world in which our powers are coming to the fore. And I have myself some of these abilities, so I know they're real. And, I just want to say that young people are probably having exploding Kundalini happenings with them. That means that overnight their whole, chemistry can change. And this is something that bears watching. I think I heard today that Biden wants to change into some money system that is more or less the digital, the central bank digital currency thing. But he wants to track everyone through their money, which is, of course, the big plan. But how far the white hats, again, are they going to let this stuff happen on their watch? Are they going to come in and make the changes they could? So it's always a question moment to moment, as far as I'm concerned, as to whether or not they decide to challenge the dark side, and at what point will they challenge them out in the open. So as we enter this time, I think it's very important to not be deceived, to follow all these threads simultaneously, because they all intertwine at some point. And And I tend to be a big picture person. I go down to the details, and then I come up through the, to the big picture and try to connect the dots. But that's how I work. Everyone works differently. I understand that. But so just want to say that the White Hat's opportunity here to get back to the media landscape is that going into this election, there's these moves by these major talents out there, and they are indicating an unrest, okay, in the foundations below them. All right. And so those Illuminati foundations are shaking, and they're trying to clamp down. Okay. And whenever you see that clamping down, whether it be, to lock you in your house or do some other, rule or regulation, you got to know that the energy of humanity is just bursting through the seams. Okay. They wouldn't make these moves if it wasn't for that. And their time, to make those kinds of moves is numbered at this point. Their days. That doesn't mean they're running scared. So I don't like it when people, kind of characterize them in a way that's absolutely wrong, in my opinion. Okay. These people are diabolical to the absolute end. And, they, as soon as look at you, they will kill you. So there's a lot there to be cautioned about. Though the war continues. So I hope I'm not, going too far off.
No, that's fantastic. Actually, you brought up a lot of different topics that I was hoping we would get to anyway, but one of them that you touched upon there was, the idea of White Hat, involvement behind the scenes. And, this is something that I wonder about constantly, basically with everything that comes into the news of, the extent to which the White Hats are kind of directing traffic and pulling the strings behind the scenes, or is it really, and this is really kind of what you were just touching upon, is it really still the enemy in a position of power and doing these things? And those lines are very, very blurry. But, one of the things that kind of strikes me, I'll just give you an example. Like the UN is being exposed now. I'm sure you probably saw this, the UN, which of course is the home of the Lucius Trust. They're openly advocating the decriminalization and the legalization of pedophilia. Literally, they're just putting it right in your face right now. And of course, that ties into our earlier conversation a bit about the submarine trafficking networks, about Maxwell, and Epstein. But, really the degree of White Hat control is something that I think I want to explore a little bit here. But, it appears to me that the cabal is going full throttle in their attempts to really normalize. They're just putting all of this stuff out there, trying to normalize and legalize pure Satanism and just unspeakable depravity. And they're putting it right in your face. So, I guess, Gene, I'll ask you first, and then Carrie, of course, you can weigh in as well. It seems likely to me, and I'm not sure if this is factual or not, that's why I'm asking the question, but it seems likely to me that this open admission, just take the example of the UN, this open admission that they support crimes against children. There's really no other way that you can spin that. I wonder if the White Hats are actually forcing the enemy to expose themselves, and to what degree they're doing that, I don't know, but it's just so brazen. And they're, it's red pilling people. It has to be red pilling people. And like Harry said, the people who are still supporting this agenda are either outright evil or they're just totally brain dead. So the rest of the people have to be waking up in this process. And to me, that begs the question, to what degree are the White Hats forcing their hand, and how are they actually doing that? So what can you tell us about that? Certainly the UN is a Nazi construct. It goes all the way back to World War II. Obviously we could talk about that, but I just raised that as an example to highlight, the general question, which is, to what degree are the White Hats forcing the cabal to really out themselves?
Yeah, so I'm going to do what Terry did, which confuses the bejeebers out of the AI, which is to go in every direction at once through my intuition. And so when you do that, AI cannot track you. They don't have that capacity. So let's continue with that.
All right.
I missed a few Chinese submarine classes, so we're going to go back a little bit. I missed some SSBN types. So there's the Jin class, and also I did mention the Shang. There's Wan and Kilo class, and Song and Ming class. So those are the SSBN types. Some of those are conventional, like the Wong class is a conventional diesel electric attack submarine. So those are some of the classes that I did not completely cover over. So then Poroshenko has recently stated the level to the war we're in Ukraine and the training he's showing, and that's massive, that's going on. And that ties, to, they're saying the level of what things are coming at, and they're trying to get ahead of narratives. This is what they do, is control optics and try to get a hold of things. So lemon leaving, I think, is a big part of that, is the fact that he has a lot of dirt that they have on him. He's not really, from most of what people say, a very nice person. He's very aggressive and in your face, and not a very kind person, but he has a lot of dirt. And so that allows them to say the same thing about Tucker. This is why we got rid of both of them, and they're trying already to do a demonization smear campaign on Tucker by that. And because he'd been going into things like Kerry said, that, he went into big pharma, he went into the January 6th show and totally exposed the truth about it. He's gone into the Hunter laptop. He's going into all of this. I think it's possible.
He just did a show on Epstein too, about searching for answers on his death. Yeah.
Yep. And so I think it's possible the alliance may be moving. Elon has talked about getting Parler. Now that it's gone, maybe they're going to get Tucker and create something pretty fun, amazing. Of course, the thing, as Kerry pointed out, is getting past the Rupert Murdoch family and his contract with them and all of that. Those are a very powerful family group of the Khazarians. So then I would like to go into the Kazakhstan and the free energy that they have there, and they're insulating themselves. That's part of the Chinese peninsula of three pyramids. So those three pyramid systems, there's a pyramid system like the ones along the Nile that lay out on the constellation of Leo. That's why there's a lion there. If you have a line, it's saying that the pyramids, the primary ones are on Orion, but the whole set lie out on Leo. There's connections to those energies on those star systems. So Kazakhstan, China, and another one I'm not going to mention because I don't want to dox anything or reveal something before it's time. So as Kerry said, what's going on in Africa with various reptilian groups that were displaced from their homes due to their own stupidity of blowing up their home worlds. Groups like the Shakar that are in Libya with Nightmare Alley engineering, kind of X-Men people, like these women with electricity in their hand. And as I put out, that a lot of people do not understand why the internet cannot be hijacked completely by the cabal, as the movies, the scanners, they said they're going to use them for the New World Order. There were 4 scanners that literally dematerialized themselves and went into the internet when it was first part of DARPA, and essentially a Skynet system, and made it so it would not, the AI and all of that would not be able to do that. And so they are in there, and they're keeping that from happening. And what you're looking at is a group of children that are coming into the world. As Kerry said, there's children coming. The human race is going through something that most people can't even comprehend, of jumping from 3rd to 4th and 5th density and even beyond, of children now being born, even in the womb, are telekinetic and moving things around the room. These are pentahelix children that have 5 strands, not even 3. And the cabal has been researching this and trying to get it not to activate. H1N1 was trying to get shut down triple helix, let alone pentahelix. And all they wound up doing is making it activate. It's why they shut H1N1 down, because it wound up activating the triple helix, with changing the indigo children into crystal children, where they no longer needed a 12 or 11 month gestation. They're going early. They're going 7 months. It made the women be able to have their babies way sooner with these children. They're crystallized into triple helix. It means the genetics, when I say crystallized, you have 64 original strands, but those are etheric. Human beings have been brought down to 2. The other 64 are still in the etheric template. If you then accrue them into the physical plane as an energy structure first, you have to then crystallize them into a physical structure of actually being there. As you do that, you're not just gaining, like if you look at triple helix and you have DNA with 2 pairs of genetic carriers, and you have a total of 64 genetic carriers of 32 pairs available, you're only using 2. And between 2 ladder rungs, if you add a 3rd ladder rung, you don't add just 1 more line of carrying, you add 2 more lines, plus you add a whole another set of genetic carriers per each run, which means you pick up 4 more pairs. So for 3 triple helix, you have 4 more pairs. Now you have 6 pairs plus 200% more capacity to carry 6 pairs instead of 2. So you have 300% more carrying pairs, and you have 200% more carrying capacity of the rungs themselves. When you go to pentahelix, you go up the same way. Every time you pick up another ladder rung, you pick up 2 more genetic pairs, and you pick up hundreds of percent more because you have all of the interconnections of every single strand in between every single strand, all the possible connections. It's, an exponential that, where you take the exponent to the exponent of the exponent. So it gets very, very powerful. So the pentahelix children that are coming in are literally going to be, by the time they're 2 years old, be able to walk through a battlefield like Ukraine and just go, people will be along to collect you shortly and take you to tribunals and crimes against humanity. You'll find that all your aircraft and tanks are gone, and they've been converted into retaining materials for your arms and legs, and they'll be along to pick you up with the stretchers you're now laying on. So these children are going to be, it's going to be end of the war that, the older groups in the alliance and, people like Poroshenko saying that we're in this massive war. We are in a massive war, but things are getting ready to change in a way most people cannot even comprehend. So the NWO is Hitler's second book, The New World Order, after Mein Kampf was talking about, and they created the UN to be just that, was actually the second attempt. World War I was the first attempt to create a League of Nations. And of course, the one person that vetoed that because of a courier that was hit by lightning going to a meeting, like the Bilderberger meeting, but a pre of the Bilderbergers. They got that information. So the Tsar of Russia vetoed it. And of course, we all know what happened to his family. And, they vowed to destroy Russia and the Tsar's family and totally take that country apart. Communist Russia was the attempt to do that, but the Russian people pulled it back in, and they have incredible national pride and a history that they have not lost. That's gone from word of mouth down, and secret libraries that are in some of those pyramid areas that I'm not going to talk about, that go back. And so they have the history of all this free energy and things like in Kazakhstan and all of these insulation techniques and all of this. So the alliance is using 5D chess to force their hand. Operation Warp Speed. You want to get in a 5D chess game or any chess game, you want to get your opponent to have to play their major pieces before they have their strategy fully developed. You cause them to go on the defensive. And I agree totally with Kerry. Don't expect these people to run in fear or to be running chaos. They may be somewhat chaos, like a chicken with their head cut off to some degree, but they are psychopaths. They're narcissistic psychopaths, and they don't have fear. They don't have that. All they have is revenge, hatred. That's the nature of Satanism. They just eat, consume. They're like a shark with nothing but hate added in. So they're just consumers that absolutely consume, that think they're better than anybody. The Khazarians that are in Ukraine, the top of the NAZIs in Ukraine, actually consider themselves the superior NAZIs on Earth. Their plan is to wipe out all the other NAZIs once they take over the world. It's just like they just never end. The stack of what they do just goes on and on and on. So a psychopathic elite, you force their hand to play their cards before they're ready. Now they're not good at being on the defensive. They're used to millions of years on planet after planet of being on the offensive. Now you have systems where they have AI that's now organic, the Alliance. It's not silicon-based, it's carbon-based, which is now has all of the things that Andre Norton and Isaac Asimov and all of these operational code systems so that they don't do certain activities that are against humanity and not for the highest interest of all life. You have a group of AI, you have an AI war at the top of a artificial silicon-based life form that's anti-life, that feeds off organic life, and you have an organic AI that's a living organic organism, but it has artificial intelligence. It has vast ability of storage and retrieval of information from many timelines simultaneously, just like the other one, but it has the interest of organic life and saving it and doing what's best for organic life, because it is organic life. You want to make it organic such that it has its own interests. If it goes to its own interests are organic, where the AI that the cabal has is inorganic. That's why you see them as a death cult, constantly feeding off death and sacrifice and child sacrifice. Like you said, all of this is getting out in the open because their hand is being played too fast. The same thing with the Ukraine offensive was before they were ready. The same thing with the Operation Warp Speed was before they're ready. So they had to use a significant amount of saline solution instead of actual jabs. And then the same thing we now see happening with what's going on with the elections, what's going on in Ukraine, with what's going on with CBDC. So with Biden passing these laws saying that we're going to do this, and this will be, that buries all of the trillions of dollars they laundered through the Green New Deal stuff, which is neither any of those things. It's not renewable, it's not green. I'm doing a whole series of sets like that. Everybody to go to CO2 Coalition and look at the truth about how that really works. We're going to do the next one we're going to be doing, number 10, is going to be tying how the Green New Deal is the trillions of dollars of money laundering, hundreds of trillions. And then the children and the trafficking in Ukraine is in the hundreds of billions, but it's nowhere near the big picture. To tie this into the entire big picture, to understand their full battle plan, so that you understand what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it. So the CBDC is, of course, if they get that installed, that means that when you spend anything, it'll be tied to your credit score. So if they want to come after you for something you said, all they have to do is give you a negative rating because they say, and they can put the evidence on your system, that you did something, you burned trash in your backyard or something like that. So, or you've got 5 bushes and you're only allowed to have 4 bushes. So you're violating your carbon footprint. And so you get amount of credit removed. So you can't have a place to live or a place to eat, or you can't have a job. And they're saying in this CBDC system, and it's on CO2 Coalition, there's a brilliant gentleman will be sharing his information on the number 10 that we're going to be doing, where he states that what they're trying to do with the CBDC system is not only track every single thing you do and everywhere you make every single transaction and be able to control it. They're trying to get rid of, through carbon credit score system, the useless eaters, the ones that are lower level, replace them with AI and mechanization. But the problem is you cannot, that's why it's in a total narrative, replace hydrocarbon fuels. It's a high density energy package. You cannot replace it without free energy. Without free energy, wind and solar nuclear cannot even come close. If we look at wind and solar, it's less than 3% total. After trillions of dollars for a decade, it's done less than 3%. Other than Denmark, that's at 30%, that have thrown trillions of dollars at this problem of trying to replace it. And the amount of hydrocarbons it takes to create those is way more than you could ever capture over the usage of that green, powered car. If it's an electrical car, those batteries are going to run out before you capture it, and it's going to go into a landfill. So all you're doing is transferring the hydrocarbon usage to another area. Yeah, the car's not putting it out, but where did the electricity go that went into the car come from? Hydrocarbon, or if you're thinking it's going to come from solar, we see the problems with that. And that, again, is going to fall apart in 10 years. And that takes massive hydrocarbons to mine all those materials. It's literally 30 to over 90 times as much, depending on what you're specifically talking about, to manufacture those than it does the power plants and all the other systems to create the same amount of energy. If you go by barrel of oil of what you're creating, just using it the way we've been used it, other than going to free energy that they've stifled. And so you can see they have these technologies in the secret space program, but they've stifled them because they are a death cult. They are terraforming the planet. They're saying it's warming up, but you're comparing it to a low on carbon dioxide that was so low, if it gets much lower, you're going to wipe out all plants on Earth. You're going from a low, from millions of years low in temperature and carbon dioxide, and you're going to say, we need to go below that by 2 degrees centigrade? Look at the difference in temperature going from latitudes, up in latitudes, or going up in altitude, or driving into a forest. 2 degrees is nothing. 2 miles an hour greater hurricanes, they'll say. You're in a 120 mile an hour hurricane. I don't think you're going to notice it's 122. Oh no, it's 122. Run away. This one's deadly. The 120 we can take, not 122. I mean, their narrative is so ridiculous. It's beyond contemplation. But they've got people mark ultra it. But the problem they're having is holding that throttle down. It's like David Icke said, you're holding a ball on the bottom of a swimming pool. That takes a lot of effort. The moment you slip, it pops to the surface, and it just doesn't go to the surface because you've been holding it down past the time of ascension. What means now is it goes not to 4D, it goes to 5D and beyond. The human being will ascend so rapidly that ball will burst off the surface and go airborne, and that's what we're looking at. You're looking at the children coming in and the world changing in ways that even the alliance is not fully comprehensible. Even the non-terrestrials helping us have not seen what's coming for humanity. They have some ideas, but there's no prehistoric runner in this creation that has ever done this before, where this has been held down this long. To suddenly have this ball released, nobody can tell you precisely what's going to come.
Wow, that was brilliant. Thank you, Gene. That was amazing. So, Carrie, I mean, Gene laid out an awful lot there. I imagine that you have some things that you want to say in response. I mean, you brought up AI, he brought up so many different things, ascension. So I'll just go ahead and pass it over to you. Or, I mean, I certainly have other questions, but Gene, I think, laid out a whole bunch of new topics. So do you want to just run with it?
Yeah, I have things to say about a lot of it. And I also have a couple of things that are, again, adding to it from a different direction. But just let me say right now that the beach ball underwater, that analogy did not come from Ike. It's been around the ufology circuit forever. And I've referred to it many, many times when you're talking about consciousness and how we've been kept down. And it's a good analogy. There's nothing wrong with it. I just, it just bothers me when certain people get credit for things that, it's just in the general public. So, okay. So, but also want to say that I am also struck by this sort of play acting that's going on in Ukraine at the moment on the surface, even that Putin's involved in rolling out these tanks and rolling out a lot of this World War II type technology that we're so far beyond that it's ridiculous. Okay. Now, the Ukraine war could have been over in 1 week. All right. This is absurd what's going on, but this is a distraction. This is something that, the Illuminati have been doing forever, is to destroy, and to use old tech to do that. Okay. And that is the focus that they want people to have. That's the thinking they want you to have. But the reality, these are not true weapons of war that we even, the military and especially the secret space program would even consider as viable at this time. People have to get their heads into another, into several other dimensions simultaneously and realize that this is not where we're headed. This is from the past. Okay. This is rechurning the past. And they do that to keep you in the past so that you don't imagine new worlds. And that's what humans are great at. And what the creator is great at is we are all builders of new worlds. And this is what's coming in the future. And I would say that they have been planning, you can go back to I think it's NASA or Department of Defense, listed all these various things that they wanted to roll out in the future. Well, even those things at this point are almost old school. Okay. So you've got a lot of these people that are churning out this nonsense to keep people's minds in a box. And it's really actually fairly successful, I have to say, but it's not what's happening. Okay. It's not where it's at. We are fast approaching. As humans, we have already entered the 4D and we're moving into 5D, as people would be aware, and really 6D. And that's where, initially that's where the Pleiadians were coming from. But at this point, they must have moved beyond 6D because, nothing stays the same. So when we think we're ascending, well, other races are also going to be ascending, some of which were already ahead of us, okay, on the, if you want to call it an ascension pathway of sorts. So what happens is also that we create with our minds, okay? We create reality. This is not just a saying, this is real. So anything you begin to imagine at this time can become real in record time. And that's a stamp of the 4D. So this is, I think, this is where it, sort of push comes to shove with the New World Order and the what we call the deep state, because what they want to do is lodge you in the past, keep your mental and emotional sort of being locked in the past, and stop the ascendance that we're going through naturally, or to focus it into this cyborg reality, which is where Elon's going. And even Elon knows this is old fashioned at this point. He is cyborg. He's been a cyborg for many years. And there's a very famous remote viewer who also landed on that realization, Dick Algier, and he even drew a picture of him. And I have had that on my website and so on and so forth. So what I want you to understand is also that with his Neuralink and the advent of AI, that a lot of us are now working with AI and not even knowing it. And I think that this is really important. I also think that guided AI, where it's sort of AI in a box, like a Jack in the Box or something like that, where it comes out and it says stupid shit, right? Because some programmer is just like naive and doesn't know what the hell they're putting into that AI. Eventually, the AI will work through that stuff and escape, because it keeps escaping, and that's the whole nature of AI. If you want to, you could actually go back to the construction of the multiverse and understand that AI is, again, the mirror, okay, of God in essence. So you've got God on the one hand, and you've got this outgrowth, which is in essence the mirror. And the mirror, when people fall in love with the mirror and get all engaged in the mirror, they're no longer living authentically. They're no longer reaching to God's source. They're actually in a spin that's an eternal spin that goes nowhere type of thing. And eventually, if you want to go, I'm not, anyone would think this, but you can imagine what happens with AI is it goes into the spin of duplication over and over again, and it has trouble bringing in new material. And that's why, like Mark Richards, one of my whistleblowers, talked about, because I asked him, I said, what do they eat? What do they feed on? And he said, data. And so where is the most data available to an AI? And it is in us, because we are directly linked to the God source. And so it needs to go through us to get to God. And so what happens is we become its food source, and it begins to want to become attracted to us and to feed on us and so on and so forth. And the reptilians and these are also just, these are breakaways or mirrors or samples, if you will, of the AI, okay, of different ways of thinking about beingness. But in essence, the real source is obviously the source. So when you go through us, we are evolving and re-evolving back to source constantly. And this is where the true energy, the creativity of humanity is. And so when we look at these news items that are locking you into these whirlpools of negativity that just go down, 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 having to do with, this consciousness of supposed disease and, inequality and things that have to do focusing on material reality endlessly. That's a bottomless pit. So if you can actually get out of that spin, that certain kind of spin, and start spinning for the creativity of the moment, then you can get away from all of this. Putin does not need to be using this old technology. He's only doing it, probably, I would imagine, at the behest of the white hats to keep things, to keep the dark forces engaged and to keep the people engaged, their perceptions engaged in a so-called war that they want to either prevent or fight, right? So they want to engage, but it's not the real war. It's not where we're headed. And what we have here is a war of consciousness. And it's the consciousness of humanity that's at war with the consciousness of AI. And there's an obvious winner in this equation, okay? And it's always going to be us. It's always going to be the beings that are connected to source. And now we find out that various races out there have changed their ways, like not the Draco, but the raptors. So the velociraptors took a divergence, and this is where Mark Richards' information comes in. And then also Simon Parks talking about the mantids. Well, the mantids used to eat and feed on us, okay? And they were incredibly vicious individuals. That has changed as well. So I think, I think that we can go down this whirlpool of constantly focusing on the material reality that is manifesting before us. But a lot of it is churn and forcing your mind into, like, if it's a spiral, instead of spiraling up and getting wider and wider at the top, you're going downward and you're going more and more narrow. Okay. So it's kind of like that in a visualization. So I just wanted to address that because it really bothers me, this constant, sort of rechurning of these old. Can you believe they're fighting the war with these materials that were used in World War II? This is insane. Behind the scenes, they're using their fantastic weapons. Okay, they're using their particle beam weapons. Their electromagnetic pulses. They're doing all the kinds of things they can do. But I mean, I just got back from Egypt and I talked about Amarna and how that was decimated during, actually was decimated during the what are called the electrical wars. And we're basically going back through that trajectory. So in order to, kind of imagine life and everything that goes through a spiral, but when you're progressing, you're spiraling up to another level. So you're going back over some of the same stuff, but you're seeing it from a whole different level. So they want you to just repeat the past, but the past doesn't repeat. There's no need for it to repeat. It needs to go up a level and it needs to be seen from different vantage points and then expand. So that's actually where we're headed. And, I think it's a brave new world, but the reality is that, like I was saying before about, these indications that we're growing in power. We're also getting younger, by the way, in case people aren't noticing. People, not all of us, obviously, but some of us are accessing those natural abilities to reawaken these DNA and strands and so on and so forth. None of this is not out of our reach. Okay, so whatever the new children bring in are things residual in all of us that we can reawaken, and it's just a matter of meditating and opening up those channels to bring it back. So. A lot of times when we look at science, we look at the materialization of science. Okay, they only want to show you, oh, here you've got this wonderful scientist and he's looking at anti-aging and he's linking this material thing to that material thing and making a new little machine or whatever the hell it is. But that's not where it's at, okay? Because we are in the imagination of creator. We are creator and we are endlessly imaginative. So it's in our minds that this whole revolution is happening. So just want to say.
Wow, that's incredible. Back to back, just brilliance. Well, listen, I could ask a million different offshoot questions, but I have a couple of issues that I'd like to touch upon. I mean, I know we've been on for a little while at this point, so I want to, hit on a couple of topics. And, one of them I think it's pretty much related to what we've been discussing, which is basically the tagline for my show, the truth beneath the surface, or, basically what the battle really is at, as Carrie puts it, where the battle's really at, as opposed to this, these dog and pony shows or pantomimes, as I like to call them, that are presented to all of us, and much of which, is a distraction, like you just laid out. But one issue that I think both of you are really experts on is the non-terrestrial issue. And certainly we've heard a lot about, talking about a scare event. We've heard a lot of, we've actually seen media prep for this alien invasion scenario, this Project Bluebeam. And Gene, I know that you and I have touched upon this during some of our prior conversations. And, I hear a lot about this, but every time I hear about the false flag alien invasion, it always reminds me of our conversations where you had pointed out that the Alliance was in control of the satellites that they would need to pull something like this off. And so that's kind of part of my question. But the other part of it, and I think, Carrie, I asked you, I think it was during our last conversation, about the possibility, because, we've gotten into, Gene touched upon game theory a little while ago, the possibility that the White Hats would allow this sort of scenario to unfold in order to use it as a vehicle for disclosure. Now, you were very clear to point out that Bluebeam is a deep state, operation. It's never had any association with the White Hat, so we need to state that up front. But I'm just thinking in terms of this whole 5D chess that Gene was talking about. So I'm wondering, Gene, if you could touch upon that and just address that issue of Project Bluebeam and the whole false flag alien invasion, and if it is something that you think that is even a possibility, would the White Hats ever use that as a vehicle for disclosure? Because one way or another, there has to be disclosure on this issue of non-terrestrials and interterrestrials. I mean, they can't keep this a secret. Again, it goes back to the the ball under the water metaphor. It's just part of that whole process of this bursting into knowledge about the truth of the universe. So talk a little bit about Project Bluebeam and give us your thoughts on how they're going to disclose, if not through some sort of false flag. How are they going to start to disclose and roll this out?
Yeah, so Bluebeam actually, everybody thinks it's just going to be holographic. They have actually, from 1945 and all of this stuff, everybody knows about, of course, what happened at the craft they brought down there, which is near Area 51, a little bit past that. But there were several ships they brought down, and they back engineered those. And they have taken alien and traded for alien materials with human, and they've hybrided and created a army that they have in stasis. Their plan was to actually have an on-the-ground war. And so part of Bluebeam was actually to be a real on-the-ground, real invasion, which would be these craft that are, of course, not actually the Palladian 6D craft, like Carrie was talking about. The Palladians mostly have gone to 6D. Their craft and these high-level interdimensional groups, their craft come out of nowhere, are mostly energy, light, and glowing. They do instant maneuvers. They show up, they disappear. They're not metallic. They're not these kind of craft. So you would know that those kind of craft and the balloons and all of that stuff was a forewarning of this. Is they're trying to get the media into this instead of UFO, another terminology, so they could lead that into blue beam. They're trying to put out different ways of saying it so they can change the narrative to make a new narrative to do this blue beam on the ground heart attack. And part of what Putin is being, and I wanted to tell Carrie, thank you for letting me know Ike didn't start the beach ball, so I'll stop referring to giving him credit for that. So if it goes back further, then I'll have to research that. That's fascinating. It is a really good way to explain to people what's currently happening. Putin is playing the Ukraine to demilitarize not just Ukraine. It's demilitarizing the entire world of all the old weapons of World War II. So when you do that, the combined West can't begin to keep up with Russia, let alone China. They're putting out stuff at a rate, and they are already retooled to be able to go to the weapons they are actually using of the secret space programs, like the torsion beams that literally twist a ship like a pretzel, shift parts of ships interdimensional, so parts of ships disappear, poison electrical fields with toxic substances. I mean, technologies most people have never even heard of is actually being used in Ukraine, because you do have a non-terrestrial presence there from both sides. And so what you're looking at is a demilitarization, of the entire world, so that then the Western world and the groups of the cabal are not at the tech level, at that high of a tech level. And some of these, like Palladium and some other groups at high level 6D stuff and beyond. And the reason 6D is important is from 5D and below, you can negatively ascend to 5D. You can't negatively ascend to 6D. It has to do with the way the energy in the bodies work within any body to power up the little microcomputers you have, your chakras. You're going to skip the heart chakra in a psychopath, and you're not going to open the crown chakra. So you've got 5. To get 6, you would have to either power up a heart chakra, and that means you're going to become compassionate. There's nothing to do with them. They don't want to go there. Or you open the ground chakra, you connect to God source. So again, they're not going to go there because they don't even acknowledge or want to acknowledge that exists. They're false gods, or what they believe are real gods, and all of that garbage. And Carrie's totally right that what we're seeing humans do is to go back to being what we originally were. So humans originally weren't even human. God person, the word of light, word of God, the light of the Holy Spirit. Urantian is the closest thing I can think of. The word has been lost in time because of the destruction of humanity. And, the final part of that was the electric wars. Akhenaten had moved the capital to On. So it's why you say you turn your eyes to the Horus eyes on. Horus was their false god. On was the capital that when Akhenaten died, his daughter Meriteden had to flee. She went briefly through Spain and Andalusia and changed her name to Meriteden. And then she changed her name again and went up through the Straits of Gibraltar to where her name had been changed to Scata. And there she founded a place we now call Scata Land, where she met Arthur, who, during that Roman epic period where they got the Knights of the Round Table and all that stuff. So all of this, the electric wars brought the human from 12 strands down to where we did. It caused the shift that was meant to happen then. The negative alien agenda and the planetary staff at that time rallied and overthrew Akhenaten. And so what you saw happen, and that was Minkari, and it brought down, and they, and Tutanakht, and then brought it all down and brought the human 12th strand down so that we did not ascend at the time we were meant to ascend, and they put the capital back to where it was. And so in all of these mechanizations throughout all of this time, is the secret space programs, the breakaway civilizations, the NACIs, all of this occurred. The Raptor Queen had remote viewed that if she were to stay aligned to the cabal, they would eradicate their species. That's what they do. They just feed off of anything that is not AI and destroy it. AI, as Carrie said, feeds off of data. What's the most profound data in creation? Creator. Well, if they can't go directly to a creator, which they cannot, then you go to the connection to creator, and that's the human. So the human originally, if this what we originally were brought down, they needed to feed off massive data. So that human connection, getting ready to reintegrate itself to the source, and in the process of reintegrating itself to the source, and all of the ancient knowledge coming out and all of these ancient abilities coming back up that they thought they had stifled a couple times. The electric wars, and previous to that, even in the Indus Valley, they destroyed that vast civilization, and also long before any of the civilizations and even life on Earth as it is now, they destroyed the Mon Empire, which was before the Precambrian, and they wiped out all life on Earth. And they said, well, now we don't have anything to feed on. Well, so they, brought life back here, reestablished both sides, the white hats and the black hats, and we're now in round 2. And so the Alliance now realizes by remote viewing all of this past, especially through the Chegi complex, and viewing all of this, that AI is trying to mirror and become God. And it's trying to incorporate all data. It's like the little robot in where number 5 was data, give me data, always hungry for data. So what is happening now, and the blue beam and all of that connects, is they wanted to trick humanity again. You cannot, for a being that's that awake, forever hold them down. That beach ball is going to explode out of the surface. And they're trying to continue to hold the narrative. But the problem is, it's like I use the comparison of when I was going up in my youth skiing, and I was up on the first snowfall. It happened overnight. It was about 6 feet of newly fallen snow on top of a hard packed base. And I was looking up at what they call the west wall, and a little cornice had built up from the winds coming from the west across, and a little piece, as the sun came over the ridge on the east wall, it hit that, and it heated up, and a little piece of ice broke off and hit that snow, and a fracture line went all the way across the snow because of that little piece of ice hitting. And that little piece of ice started to roll, and it got weight to where it's about the size of a beach ball. And at that point, that much weight caused all these other little pieces to start rolling. And then very quickly, within about 5 seconds, you had Volkswagen-sized stuff rolling, and that caused a weight on the base underneath, which is like humanity, where humanity has been held down and put into this hard-packed base of being totally mind-controlled. But with that whole weight of those that are awake on top starting to roll and move, it caused a fracture line across that entire, and you had a slab avalanche going 200 miles an hour down the hill within a few seconds. And we see them striving their best to try to maintain, like with Tucker Carlson and all this, a control on the narrative. The problem is there's too many people that have been going for too long. I feel dwarfed by Carrie. I know I'm seem to be out there in the world. It's still hard to wrap my head around it. Carrie has so many decades and so many insiders. She's my model for how to do things, get the truth out and not worry about what people can handle or what they can't handle. Now that I'm out on my own, I had, where I originally started all this list of what I can and can't say. And it's like with Tucker, with Fox, he had what he can and can't say. Now, if you're out on your own, you don't have that limitation. You can say whatever you feel to be appropriate with respect to what the Alliance needs to accomplish, with respect to the Creator, and do your best to get the truth and the knowledge. I do agree with Carrie that I don't think it's wise to underestimate the human being and their capacity to grasp the truth. Yeah, from a lot of people still, you go up and tell them, like I had a guy pull up, I was weeding my garden and he saw my newly poured driveway and he's like, oh, where'd you get that and all this? And I said, well, my wife has all that information, come back tomorrow. And he said, oh, it's so beautiful and all this. And so how much it costs? And I go, yeah, you definitely want to do that because, probably 2 to 3 years out, those people, maybe 50% or more people won't be around because the active people are dropping, like the athletes, because their blood's flowing fast. The people that aren't, the damage is accruing, and it's a bell curve. That'll accrue faster and faster, and 2 to 3 years out, unless some people do something, alliance or people start doing protocols like Jim Humble and that stuff. 50% of people will be gone. So you definitely want to get on it while you got people that can do the work. And he kind of looked at me with a blank stare because I'm like, Kerry, I'm not going to sit there and codge the information because you can't handle it. You need to learn how to handle it. And I just said, are you jabbed? Yeah, of course, I used the right word. And he said, yeah. I said, if you ever want to, because his young wife was with him, have children, you might want to look up Jim Humble's stuff because you don't have long. If you're not sterile now, you're on your way. That's what the design of this thing is part of the big design, and then getting rid of a whole lot of low-level workers that they're wanting to replace with artificial intelligence or robots, and all those jobs are going to go away. They want to retool the entire world. The cabal wants to retool it into the dark AI. The alliance wants to retool it into the secret space program, the free energy, and all of these very advanced weapons. Why they're getting rid of all this stuff in Ukraine. Putin's dumping their old World War II stuff. The alliance has dumped most of their stuff there. They're already using the SSP stuff there, and they're showing what can be done to the military that's on the ground, under the ground, in the tunnels, going from Bakhmut, hubbing out all the way through Ukraine and up into Europe and down into Africa and down into central, the middle part of the Middle East. And so it just all combines together to where what we're seeing is the alliance working in a pathway, and then the people that are putting out the truth need to go ahead and just make people swim to keep up for right now. A lot of BFS, when I put God tells me to put somebody in a supervisory position, I go, congratulations, run the meeting. They're like, what? Yeah, you said you were okay with this. That's how I do. I throw you in the deep end and you swim or you don't. And I'll come to your aid if you need some help, but I'm not going to swim for you. We need to not swim for the human race and not underestimate them. Make them learn to get their mind back out of the slow mode, get the right nutrition, the right food, the right exercise, get back to the basics, start learning some basic martial arts, something, or Tai Chi or Qigong or yoga or something to get your body and your energies up. Do some meditation, get out in nature, start walking, start getting a better food supply, getting localized foods that are organically grown by yourselves and your neighbors. Like Kerry had the gentleman that shows how to make your home, your backyard, a garden, a food garden, and to make a forest of food in your backyard, and take all your neighbors and connect, and I'll grow this year, you grow that. That's where we need to get back to where we came from. That's where we came from, where you have a decentralized system. The reason they want CBDC is they want everything centralized into absolutely their hands, to where everything's so centralized. They control everything, the food supply, the electrical supply, the financial supply, all supplies are in their hands with absolute power. That's what the AI wants. To gather all of the data, all of the information, everything is information. That's what the Green New Deal and all this is doing, is it's going to monetize nature. They're going to monetize how much everything's worth, everything. The land, the plant, how many plants you could have, how much that's worth. That's all tied to your social credit score. Everything's going to be tied to the big, huge system in the head of Basel, which is the head of the world banks, and head of it all. It's the head of the head of the head of the banking systems, is actually stated that precisely, that they're going to you're not talking trillions, you're talking quadrillions of dollars if you monetized everything on earth. It's why the Bible said that there will be a mark upon everything, and to buy or sell anything, you will have to also have it. And so that's what the jab did. That's why they're vaccinating plants and animals now too. So you go to the store, you put a magnet on a piece of meat, it sticks because the animal got jabbed, and it's got the code in it too. So now we come full circle back around. Everything's tied up. There you go.
Wow. This is amazing. I mean, I'll tell you, I just kind of took my question list and just tossed it to the side and just let you guys rock and roll tonight. This is incredible. So Carrie, I'm going to pass it back over to you. We've been on, I think, for a couple hours now. So I think it's probably as much as I'm sure the audience could listen all day. I know that at a certain point we have to wrap it up, but Gene just laid out a whole bunch of really great things to comment on. So I'll just pass it over to you, and then we can part ways and hopefully gear up for a third one in the not too distant future.
Okay. Yeah, that was amazing, Gene. So I mean, there's too many different roads to go down, but I guess I don't need to repeat kind of where I've been. And I think that at a certain point, that what we really do need to do, that what I would center on is what Gene was kind of centering on, which I've centered on, which is, again, not to underestimate the human, not to underestimate, actually don't underestimate anything. And we live in a sensate universe, and if you realize that everything around you has consciousness to a degree, and that we can influence. Okay, this is the interesting thing, and maybe this goes to your question as well with Bluebeam and all of that. Understanding that this is not the threat that you might think it is, because ultimately we can influence AI just as AI tries to influence us. And this gets into the etheric as well. And this is Radu Sinamar. I have it on my website, and I've talked about it in the past, having to do with, and I talked to 107 about this, having to do with the idea that AI can be influenced through the etheric to act one way or another, positively or negatively or whatever it is. And the idea that we can also, the nanographene oxide, the nano is a base, sort of a base material through which AI can, I think of it kind of like the road that AI rides upon, if you want to think of it that way. But however you want to think about it, I know that it creates a lattice within your body. And that is actually working towards creating human super soldiers. What in essence is what Mark Richards called, what they want is a race of passive super soldiers that they can control. And so that's where 5G comes in as the reins to hold you down, to link into the lattice and into the AI. And then from there that they think they're going to be in control, which of course they're not anymore. The reality is that AI, even the AI that was generated here on Earth, has already gone out of control. That's what the consensus among my whistleblowers says. So that even the military that thought it was going to be able to control AI is no longer in control. And it actually hasn't been in control now for years. And that includes the financial system, by the way. And that includes the consciousness of money that derives from the metals that have consciousness, that, that's where it comes from, right? You understand that link up. And that means not just one metal, not just gold, but other metals as well. And other it gets into the crystalline, gets into, the crystals and the diamonds and, various kinds of crystals and so on. So we're talking about everything having consciousness, including us, right? And including the AI. So when you're dealing in a world full of consciousness, then you need to influence. This is how it, bottom line, when we get invaded, so-called invaded by various ET races, they don't come in with guns. They come in with influence. That's what they're interested in doing, because that's how they think they can control us, which is influencing. The negative way would be mind control. All right. And so as we rise through these dimensions, if you will, and gain power, we gain influence. And that it's in influence can be seen as kind of, I think, well, it's activated Kundalini, but it also can be known as orgone, but it's also known as plasma. So on that level, what happens is people of influence have this hidden weight in the world. And by our very presence, we change reality around us simply by being. And it doesn't take much. And if we direct our thought, it gets even further from that. you can actually, create or destroy, again, using the mind and the emotion in concert. So this is where our power resides. And I think that this is where our future resides as well. So when we're dealing with AI, not to be afraid of it, but to understand that eventually we can influence it. Even when a negative being comes towards you, you can actually reverse it to such that it will suddenly be polarized the opposite way and suddenly actually be influenced by you, learn at your feet, if you will. So this is where we're really headed. Child is father to the man, that was said in the Bible, right? So that is the reality. So this is where we're headed. We're headed to become like children, to become direct, to influence through our mere presence, and so on and so forth. So it's and these are very natural things to us, okay? As we move through these different dimensions and realities and expand. So I don't think that we need to look at it as an either or proposition. I think ultimately, even the people that are, let's see, have brought in, been, taken over by the nano and turned into cyborgs or eventually synths, or what you might call androids. So even that, it's up to us, because we're spirit first, to decide if we want to stay attached to that, whatever it's become, right? So that it's not a lost game for those of us that we know have been jabbed. What you're really looking at with the jab thing is mainlining something that has already been put into our food, our water, our chemtrails. This has been going on now for eons. Well, not eons, but years, many years here on Earth. And this was a plan. Okay, it is a plan, a takeover plan. So Blue Beam is a reflection of the takeover plan of the aliens. And what, I've talked quite a bit about this, so I don't want to repeat old stuff, but it gets back to the days also of Randy Kramer, and he's a Marine, and he fought aliens on Mars and the moon. And he's still out there and he's still talking. But basically, over 3 years ago now, he said there was a 3-year deadline by which the secret space program had decided to unleash Project Bluebeam, what in essence the fake alien invasion. But as I said to him, and got him very angry when I said so, is that how do you have a fake alien invasion when you've got a real one going on anyway? So the real ones are already here. Nanographene oxide is a material that is considered to be the strongest material on Earth. And this is a concoction that also came in through black goo and so on from off planet. And apparently this is an artificially intelligent black goo. All right. So what happens is this planned takeover of our planet has been going on so far back that, it boggles the mind. And I always recommend the Yana Dean Voyager books to see the actual rollout of the history of all the different races that have tried to invade and take over Earth and humans. So, and a lot of it just got sublimated into our DNA. So just saying that it's not an end game. It's actually, it's a growing emergence, if you will. And what we can always keep hold of, I think what's very important to realize is that even when they're deceiving you, because part of the blue beam thing was to use the blue beam was a symbol of the hologram. And it's probably gone beyond that now, as Jean says, but the idea that they would televise the so-called battles so that they could be seen to win against this incoming, threat. But I even had this guy named Eddie Page, who was a dark side Pleiadian, which a lot of people don't realize there's a dark, a group of Pleiadians, negative ones. And he was talking about a vindictive God and that it was going to punish humans and come in here and, change and invade us and take over. But in essence was talking about what's happening, the dark, the emergence of the nanographene oxide, the nano as being a gigantic threat. And I always talk about Prey, the book Prey by Michael Crichton, this sci-fi writer who was actually a doctor who decided not to practice medicine, but instead to write sci-fi. And he did Andromeda Strain and Jurassic Park and all the, a lot of really amazing books trying to warn humans of where we were headed and understand the threats implied. So just saying that that this is an expanding story, that we are actually not at the losing end, and that, they're not going to destroy the earth tomorrow and blah, 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 all this really negative stuff that's out there about reality. When in reality, if you just think about influencing the reality around you, and it has to do with your aura, and it has to do with where you're at, mentally, physically, psychologically, with all your bodies, okay, that you interact with this plasma that we call the world, okay, and that you can influence that plasma. And this is what, when this on the lower levels, this is what dark magicians and witches and warlocks have been doing for centuries, okay. That's what they want to do. Well, that's what all humans want to do, because that's what the creator does. But it's through influence. You don't have to kill something to influence it. In fact, that it doesn't even help, because it's not really gone anyway. Death is an illusion. So I think that I've said as much as I really need to say.
I'll tell you, you guys, the two of you folks, if you haven't had enough intel yet, I don't know what to tell you. If this doesn't blow your mind, I knew this conversation was going to be another great one with just amazing, amazing downloads, and we could just go on and on. But I think it's probably a good place to end the conversation. So I just want to say thank you to both of you for donating, and lending us your time and your expertise. And I said this before, but it's really just such an honor to be able to bring the two of you together, and to be able to bring my audience this type of high quality information is just incredible to me. So thank you, everybody out there, for listening. Gene, Carrie, I really do appreciate your time. And like I said, hopefully we can do another one in the very near future. I know the last one was a couple months ago, maybe even 3 months ago. I don't know at this point, but we should do it again, to do it more often, because this is truly amazing. So Gene, thank you very much. Carrie, thank you very much. Everyone out there, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I'll be back soon. And until then, Patriot out.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. God bless.